Okay, so we're holding here in the Shir and Chassidus forum on the Parsha, and what we're going to be doing today is a very interesting piece from Degel, Machane, Efrayim, which really reveals the depth of what's happened with the whole encounter with Yaakov and Yosef at the beginning of Parshas Vayishlach. So let's get right into it. Degel Machane Efrayim, of course, as we know, was the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, so this is very high up in Chassidus, from the first generations, and he says some amazing things. He starts with the Pusuk says, "Vayishlach Yaakov maluchim lefunav al Esav ochev," that Yaakov sent maluchim in front of him to Esav, his brother, Artz Sayir, to the land of Sayir, which is where Yosef lived. Sedai Edom, the field of Edom. It's going to be significant why the Pusuk has to stress these two places, Artz Sayir, Sedai Edom. And V'yitzav Oisam, and Yaakov commanded the Malachim Laimor to say, Koi Taimrin Ladoini LaIsav, say this to my master Isav. It's also interesting. Why is he calling Isav his master? Im Lovan Garti, that I lived with Lovan. V'acher ad ato, and I was there until now. By Hili, and I had shor v'chamor, I had oxen and donkeys, tzoin, sheep, v'evle v'shivcha, and male and female servants. V'ashtachul hagid ladoni limtzechain by nechu, and I'm sending them to tell my master, again, who's Esav, limtzechain by nechu, to find chain, to find favor in his eyes. And Perish Rashi Zal. So Rashi explains over here, Vayishlach Yaakov Maluchim Mamish. Rashi says that the Maluchim that Yaakov sent were actually Maluchim. What Rashi means to say by that is, because the word Malach really be'emes means a messenger, and so it might have meant human messengers, we could have thought, but Rashi says actual Maluchim. That's also going to be important. So the Degel Machane Efrayim says on this, there are holy things that we can say over here. That these psikim teach us a path for our intellect. That this instructs us in the path, in the way that we should go all the days of our life. So, of course, this is something that is standard in Chassidus, that in addition to the fact that the Torah tells us certain ideas, but be'emes, there's going to be a lesson always in this for us. So, he says, V'gam Rashi rim is inyan omek b'taivas mamish. And Rashi is telling us something very deep with the word mamish, maluchim mamish. Kashin b'siyata d'shmaya, as we're going to explain with siyata d'shmaya. V'kisher psikim aili imasiyim shel psikim misaider hakoidem. And this is going to be, and we're going to connect what it says over here to the final psikim of before, where it says v'yivki boy malachai elokim, that Yaakov encountered maluchim, as it says at the end of last week's parsha. V'yikra shem malukam ahi machanayim, and he called that place where he encountered the Maluchim Machanayim, which means camps. Alpim Shomar Nikvar Al Yaakov Hulach L'Darkei, and he says that this is going to be connected to a Torah that he said before on the Pusuk where it says of Yaakov Hulach L'Darkei, Yaakov went on his way. We're going to see. There's behind this cycle. Ishtadus Peloisav Hoyo Sheiyah Merkova Lebechinas Vov. So Yaakov's entire avodah and his actions were that he should be the merkova, he should be the vehicle for the vov of the Shem Havaya, which refers to Zah, but is centered around Tiferes, which is Amidadem Tzis, which is the middle column. And that middle column, of course, you know, Tiferes is Kula Mishnayim. It's connected with Tiferes, is balanced between two middas. Midas Avram v'Yitzchak, which it's connected to the Midas of Avram and Yitzchak. She Chesed Gvira, which is Chesed and Gvira, as we know. And that's what it, and that's, he says that's what it means when it said before of Yifki boy Malachai Elikim, that the Malachim of Hashem encountered him, and Hanishekach also beyudai, Shnifki boy, that Yaakov succeeded in getting to this level, these Malachim encountered him. But Kulul boy Malachai Elikim, and these Malachai Elikim included themselves within Yaakov. And he says, "Haine beginnes bais ovas Avram v'Yitzchak," and these Malachai Elikim in this context is going to refer to Avram and Yitzchak. In other words, the midas of Chesed and Gvira. This is a chiddush because usually we don't say that Malachim refer to spheres, but in a certain sense we have this. We have this in Chassidus Furim. When we say Shul Malachim Malachai Hashulam by Friday night. So there's Sfurim that say that refers to the Partzifim. Right, that refers to, because of course we know that the Friday night Sida is going to get Chakal Tapich and Kaddish, which is Malchus, and we say, and then that's included with Atika Kaddisha, which is Arich and Zer Anpin. We have this idea that that when we say Malachai Ashur is Malachai Ashulam, it doesn't necessarily have to be Malachim. It could be in the spheres too. It sounds like a chiddush to us because for us, things are very distinct. The spheres and Atzilus are one thing, the Malachim are in the lower worlds. But in a certain sense, the idea of a Malach, like we said, a Malach means a messenger or a Shliach, right? A way of Hashem's or expressing itself in the world. So just like Hashem's or can express itself through a Malach, it can express itself through the spheres as well. In a certain sense, this idea that the Malachim, and we have this idea that down here in this world, we have this very distinct self, right? Where we all just think of ourselves as separate beings. In the higher worlds, it's not like that. In the worlds of the Malachim, it's the Malachim already sometimes it says Malachim don't have Bechira. And the reason is because that they're so connected to that oneness, even though they do have individual identities. You have Michol and Gavriel, Ariel or Full, they have identities, but those identities are bound up within Hashem because they're so close to Hashem. So in a certain sense, we can say they don't have Bechira, not that they don't have Bechira in the literal sense, but it means they're so close to Elikis that they just, they're agents to express that Elikis. Now, the same way we could say that about the spheres too. So the Chiddush that he says over here is that the Malachim he encountered is the midas of Chesed and Gvira, which those midas then balance themselves out within him, within Yaakov. He says, and because of this, and that's why it says over there that he called that place Machane, which means camps in the plural, Al Shem Shnai Midas Hanal, which refers to the idea of these two midas of Chesed and Gvira. That's why it's in the plural. But again, we want to get to the part where he told us that this is going to teach us something about ourselves and our avodah. So now he gets into this. So he says, when Yaakov was zoche to that idea of being able to embody those midas of chesed and gvira and balance them together within himself as Yaakov, right? Which is going to basically, the idea that he's going to say over here is that these are two things that we need in our avodas Hashem. Chesed in this context, as we're going to see from the Hemshech, he's going to say that chesed in our context means the idea of being aware that everything is chasudim from Hashem, and there's an aura of Hashem concealed in every single thing. Every event that happens, whether the event looks obviously good, whether it's concealed, we don't see that it's good, it's all b'chinas chesed from Hashem. But then, if that's the only thing a person has, is that awareness of the oneness of all things, well, then he's going to have a problem, because then he's going to be able to, it's not a problem, but it could be a problem, because a person like that will see that everything's a likis. If everything's a likis, so why do I have to do mitzvahs? Why do I have to grow in avodas Hashem? Hashem is everywhere. So even if a person is on a low level and he's doing things that he shouldn't be doing, well, it's also a likis, because that you also need the b'china of gvira, which gvira is tzimtzum, limitation, structure, because that we need to have that idea of the Torah, and the idea of right and wrong, and the idea of how we should conduct ourselves. We have to balance those two things, seeing the chesed, seeing the Or Hashem in everything, and at the same time, being aware that even though the Or of Hashem is in everything, but there's specific types of Or Hashem that we want to connect to more than others, and because that's what's going to allow us to grow. So he says, "Oz Vayishlach Yaakov Maluchim Lefunav al Isav Uchiv." So that's why it says that Yaakov sent Maluchim to Isav, his brother. So over here we're going to see a very, very interesting thing, because push it when we read the Torah, and especially the way it's presented to us as children, right? Is everything's very black and white. Yaakov was a tzaddik, Isav was a rusha, right? We sort of label them in that way as positive and negative. But for Emes, we're going to see over here that Isav itself is an important bechina, because he says the name Isav, right? He says Haine Olam HaAsiya. Isav is from the expression of Asiya, of doing, right? It's the same shirish. So in other words, Isav is not necessarily evil. Isav represents the physical world, and Isav represents that Gashmis that we have to deal with all the time. And that could be evil if a person gets sunk into it and isn't able to be Mekasher with Kedisha. But the idea of Yaakov sending Maluchim to Isav means that Yaakov is going to be Mekasher the higher worlds with Olam HaAsiya. He's going to reveal the Kedisha in Isav, in the lower worlds, by being aware of the fact that Or Hashem dwells even in Olam HaAsiya. So it says Isav is Olam HaAsiya. It says She'edia, as it's known, Shanashoma hi chalik alika mimal. The neshama is not of Olam HaAsiya. As we talked about many, many times, the neshama doesn't occupy any place in Olam HaAsiya. The neshama isn't something that can be measured by physical standards. It's, and for all intents and purposes, if you just want to look at the physical world, the neshama is not here, because the neshama is not of the physical world at all. Like we said, it just manifests and causes certain effects that we can see in the physical world. Push it is the idea of life, and the idea that certain molecules of carbon and whatever else they're composed of have a life to them. The biggest mystery in nature, right? How that works, and the fact that we have a consciousness, and the fact that we're able to move our bodies, and the neshama animates our mind and our body, right? Is that idea of the chalik alika mimal, that idea of that spiritual neshama that has no shaykhs to this world, expressing itself in this world. And so he says, so that neshama is v'nitin begifa udam or Olam HaAsiya. That neshama is sort of placed into or manifests through the body that we have here in Olam HaAsiya, in the physical world. But what that's doing is sheikasher kol Olam HaAsiya l'shorshoy, right? Kol dover l'shorish shaloi. The idea is that the neshama is really what reveals to us and what shows us and what indicates to us that this world, this Olam HaAsiya, is not an independent existence that's not connected to anything. Rather, it's connected to all the higher worlds, because the neshama is an expression of the higher worlds. It just expresses itself in this way, in this physical body. So he says, "V'zei kol pe'ilas hatzadik." This is really the avoida of the tzaddik, the oived es Hashem, who is a servant of Hashem. L'kashiv l'yachad olam ha'asiya olam ha'elyon l'sharshay. The whole avoida of the tzaddik is to be mikasher, to bind olam ha'asiya with the higher world, which is its source. Because olam ha'asiya is only the final expression of these higher worlds that are spiritual. And the way that the tzaddik is to be mikasher them, to connect them. And of course, we know that al pi amkus, like we talked about many, many times, it's not to make that kesher, because that kesher is always there. Olam ha'asiya could not exist without the fact that it's being emanated into from the higher olamas. What it rather means is to activate the awareness of that, right? To realize, and I guess the tzaddik would also help others realize that Olam HaAsiya is not, the physical world is not independent. It's not something that exists on its own without that rachnis that's behind it. to realize that everything's one hemshech and everything's all connected together. And that's the avoid of the tzaddik, he says. That's one part of the avodah. Then he says another part of the avodah of the tzaddik is levatel kol ha-klippus sheba'olam ha'asiyah, to be mevatel, to annul the klippus that exists in olam ha'asiyah, which on the deeper level, really what that means is because the klippus are what allows olam ha'asiyah to appear as a separate type of an existence, right? Because the klippus are koiches of havdullah, of separation, of making everything appear as a separate thing. To be mevatel the klippus means to be mevatel that illusion, and to get to the awareness that everything is all connected, that everything is part of Hashem. So I someone chatted here, and this is very, very interesting because it is, this is really the idea that we're talking about. Is someone chat? Oh, you can see Rabbi Kiva iPhones chatted to everyone, right? That maybe the reason that the offspring of Yosef has no schar other than this world is because Hakol Kol Yaakov, Yosef is the hands of this world, so his schar is here, and Yaakov is kol everything, right? Because be'emes, that's the word, right? Like we said, the way the Rizal explains it, and the way we see in the Chassidus Furim, was that really be'emes, there was meant to, Yosef and Yaakov were meant to work together. Yosef was meant to work on the physical world in a physical way and improve it and enhance it in a physical way. And to a certain extent, that is what Yosef, the scientists and the doctors and all these people, that is in a certain sense, and the people that invent technology, that is what they're doing. They're being Machane olam hagashmi. No shaykhs to rachnius, but they're being Machane olam hagashmi by inventing new types of medicines that can solve certain problems, right, that exist in the world, and new technologies that can make things easier for people, that can make life, even though it's a whole separate discussion, because however much technology has sort of helped us and made things more convenient for us, but yet at the same time, it doesn't really seem to make things more convenient in the long run, right? Because like it used to be that a person wanted to buy something, so he would go to the store and he would see a certain thing that he wants, he would buy it. But now, for convenience, we have Amazon, and you can go on Amazon, you can order whatever you want, but then you're overwhelmed with like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different options, and then you're going through them, and you're looking at the reviews and the number and the ratings, number of stars that that people gave them. You're thinking, should I buy this one? Should I buy that one? It's almost like the more that we try to make the things should go faster and the things should be more convenient, but yet you can't escape the fact that Olam Hazeh is by definition, that this world is by definition imperfect. And however much it gets perfected in certain ways, but that imperfection is always there, because that's really the chet aitzadas, and that's something that really can't ultimately be fixed entirely unless we have that bechin of Yaakov that fixes the rachnis and that connects the rachnis to this world, right? Just working on the Gashmi's Dikar world and fixing it by itself is impossible. But that's why you have Yosef and Yaakov, because you have that the two of them really are supposed to work together. That Yosef is Masakin Olam Hagashmi and perfects Olam Hagashmi, and Yaakov brings in that rachnis, and that way, between the two of them, the world gets to Tikkun, and the world gets to Mashiach, right? But that's basically the idea, right? The Yaakov is the rachnis. But then it became that, unfortunately, because Yosef is Olam Hasiyah, so he's so connected to this world, and he's so connected to the period and to the klippa which exists in this world. So because of that, Yosef has also done many counterproductive things, right? All the wars that happen, all the all the weapons of destruction and all the different negative things in the world, right, is because of that disconnect with the rachnius. So so it says in the beginning of Parshas told us, it says that Rashi brings down over there that Yaakov and Isaac were fighting for the Yerisha of Shnai Oilemis. They're fighting for the Yerisha of the two worlds. And the Surim say on that, right? That what do you mean they're fighting on the Yerisha of the two worlds? Yaakov gets the world, the higher world. Yaakov gets the Rachnius, and Isaac gets the Gashmius. But really, it ends up being that because Yaakov is able to connect, to be Mekasher, that Rachnius, to the physical world, so it ends up that Yaakov gets is Yorish Shtai Oilemis. He's Yorish this world too, in a certain sense, because he's the one that's able to elevate this world and thereby have really be'emes a deeper enjoyment even of this world. Because we know that someone who's disconnected from Rachnius and who's only focused on the physical world and is running after pleasure in the physical world, he never gets what he wants, right? It's almost like a never-ending race, because the more that a person gets a certain gashmisdika geschmack, a certain pleasure from the physical world, the more he feels that he's lacking, and the more he feels that he needs more of it, or a different kind, and it's almost like a never-ending race, right? But Yaakov, being that higher bechina that connects the two worlds, is able, and I think this is like we see this in Yiddishkeit, right? That we're able to enjoy the Rachnis, but we're also able to enjoy the physical world. We're able to have beautiful Shabbos Sidas. We're able to have intimacy with our wives in the most beautiful way. We're able to engage in those physical things and have more satisfaction from them just by the fact that we connect them to spirituality, and we're not disconnecting them, right? So Yaakov is called everything. So that's that's a very good point. That's very much in line with what we're saying here. Anyways, so that's what he says over here, that the tzaddik, his avodah is really a two-part avodah. One is to connect this physical world to Rachnius, and the second idea is to be mevatel those koiches of klippa, those koiches of separation that try to, or their function is to keep them separate. So he's connecting, and is also sort of annulling those koiches that try to stop that connection. And he says, nimtikin kol adinim, and with this avoid of the tzaddik, what happens is all the din is sweetened, because like we've talked about many times, like he's going to say beferish, because he's going to go into Nocham Ish Gamzi. We're going to see this soon, Bez Hashem. Is that really all the dinim, which dinim in this context we're going to understand as all the forces, all the powers that cause us suffering, anguish, discomfort, anger, frustration, right? It all comes from that disconnect. It all comes from that idea of looking at the physical world as cause and effect, forgetting about the spiritual aspect of it. And then when a person messes up on something, he feels like a failure. When someone interferes with something he's trying to do, then he gets angry at that person, he gets resentful of that person. If things go wrong, he gets upset, he suffers, right? Suffering comes from that separation. And when we're able to annul those klippas, those koiches of separation, then it's mamtik all the dinim, because it makes that everything in the world and everything that happens really is good, because we realize that it's coming from Hashem. And that's transformational. But at this far, he just mentioned that this is the void of the tzaddik. But then the idea, of course, is that v'derech klal kol Yisrael tzaddikim haim, but really be'emes all Yidden are tzaddikim in a certain sense, on different levels. Of course, there's greater oivdim and there's lesser oivdim, but in a certain sense, we Yidden and we Yidden who are connected to Torah and mitzvahs and connected to avodas Hashem are aware of this to a certain extent. This idea of the connection of Rachnius and Gashmius, and that the physical world is something to be elevated. So we all have, to a certain level, that avoid of the tzaddik. It says, "V'tzrichim lekasher atzmam b'Torah, oy l'talmud chacham." And then he says, and every Yid has to make sure that he's connected to the Torah or to Talmud Chacham, which is very much going with Chassidus in that way, right? That obviously everyone's connected to Torah, all Yidden, they follow the Torah, are connected to Torah to a certain extent. But some Yidden are able to be connected to the Torah in a very, very deep and spiritual, metaphysical type of a way, directly, because they're more spiritual by nature. Then others, they'll follow the Torah and mitzvahs, but that itself isn't going to be really enough to give them a spiritual experience, just because their minds are more simple. Like all the regular people, the Amaratzim, who are connected to the Baal Shem Tov and to his Talmidim, right? So for them, that spirituality is achieved by connecting to, he says, Talmud Chacham, to someone who's connected to Torah, which really would mean a tzaddik, a rebbe, right? And in that way, even if they themselves can't do it, but by the fact they're connected to someone who can, so they become one achdus with him, right? Like all the Chassidus talk about the idea of connecting to a tzaddik. Ibn Nachman mentions many times the Kitim Aran. So then really, be'emes, everybody's sort of able to access that to a certain degree. Why do we need that? Why, if we see the good in everything, right? That's going back to what we were saying before. If we see the good in everything, we see that everything's a kiss. So why do you need to be grounded in Torah or connected to a tzaddik? He says, because otherwise a person could sink into the ideas and concepts and realities of Olam Asiyah, of this physical world, right? Because the nature of a person is, however spiritual a person is, and however he has spiritual aspirations, but he has a physical body and he has physical urges, and those are very powerful, right? Those are powerful and those are very overwhelming. So if a person wouldn't have that Torah to ground him or to give him a structure in how his spirituality should look, then the tendency of most people would be to sink into the Gashmias, because it's sort of like we said, even though it doesn't give the lasting enjoyment, the lasting pleasure, but it's a quick fix. It's it's instant gratification, which is easier. And the nature of a person is he doesn't want to work super hard. He wants to have things easy. So because of that, we need to have that Torah to be able to give us that structure, to be able to engage in the physical world, and not to sink into it, right? So that's basically the idea. And he says, a person could sink into the physical world and get lost in it, whether in actual actions, right, or even in machshava, in mind processes, in the way he thinks about things. Because the whole day we're busy with the physical world, and the whole day, most people don't have such powerful spiritual experiences, right? But experiences of this world we're involved in all the time. So we need that Torah to ground us. That's why we need to have that thing that binds us to spirituality. Either through a spiritual, deep, meaningful, metaphysical connection to Torah itself, right? Or at least to connect to those who are connected, the Talmidei Chachomim, Roshei Hador, the leaders of the generation in Rachnius, in order that they should be able to pick us up, so that we shouldn't sink down into that physicality. So he says, and then there is a special way in which we can elevate everything to its source in spirituality, which again means to recognize that, right? Because it is connected, but to recognize that connection and to live with that connection, that the physical world is really connected to spirituality. He says, Gimel Bechinas Maskil Mischel Seichel, because he says that there's really three. If this comes from philosophy, this comes from the Chakiras Forum, where they say that everything has three. When someone's trying to understand something, there's three things. There's the maskul, the person that's trying to understand something. Let's say I'm trying to understand a certain piece in a cipher. So that's me. I'm the maskil. Then there's the mischel, the thing that is to be understood. And there's this cycle. Then there's the actual process of understanding, right? Those three things are connected. Because if you're missing one of those things, then there's nothing to talk about. If there's nobody to understand, then nothing will be understood. If there's nothing that's trying to be understood, then nothing is understood. And if you're lacking the process of understanding, then nothing's understood. You need to have all those three. He explains maskel, the idea of the understander, so to speak. That's the person that wants to understand. A person that wants to understand a certain thing. Miskel, the thing that's being understood. Is the thing that's trying to be that we're trying to understand. The cycle and the process of understanding, is the process through which we understand something. Okay, so that's a philosophical concept. But he's going to bring it down, bring it up, rather, I guess, to our discussion here of Rachnis. So he says, "V'hacycle," that idea, that process of understanding something is very important. He shoresh elikis. That really is. It comes from a higher place. It comes from Rachnis. It comes from elikis. Shia chachma elyoina, which is the chachma that is above. This is a really deep concept, and it's very dark. It's very subtle. So you know, we have to sort of think about it to understand it. We've talked many times about nouns and verbs, right? So in this world, a person views himself as a noun, yeah, as a thing, right? As a person, which is you know, it's a noun. It's not a process. It's something that exists, and the thing that's being understood, whether it's we're trying to understand a physical thing, we're trying to understand how a certain machine works, or whether it's a concept that we're trying to understand, is also a thing. Right? It's a physical thing or a concept, which is a non-physical thing, right? If, for those that remember from school, a concrete noun or an abstract noun, it's still a noun. But the cycle is the process. And the cycle is the actual process of understanding. And in a certain sense, the way that we've talked about many times, we brought from the Leshem this idea that really be'emes, the idea of nouns is an olam hazeh type of a thing, because it implies that things are separate. So it implies that there's a person trying to understand, there's something that he's trying to understand, and we're sort of separating them, and we're making them like, you know, this is the one who's trying to understand, and that's the thing that's trying to be understood. So it's a period, it's a separation between them. But in Rachnias, it's really, there's no nouns, there's no things that exist. There's just processes, right? Existence is a process. So when we say Kaviyuchel, that we call Hashem the Shem Havaya, right? Yidkai Vuvkai, which means to be. We're essentially saying that it is a process. Kaviyuchel, Elikis is a process. It's not a physical thing. This is the side of the Ramchal. When the Ramchal, some people, it bothered some people, that the Ramchal had this idea of describing Atzilus in the Partzifim and Atzilus, as opposed to describe them as things. He described them as processes. He described them as anhugas, as actions. And that bothered people, because the Pushab Shad and the Rizal is, you have Arich, you have Abba, and these are things. I mean, Chas v'shulam, they're not physical things, but they're entities, they're nouns. But Kaviyuchel, ultimately, on the highest level, Havaya is a process. Kaviyuchel, Elikis is a process. The Ein Sof, itself, I can't say anything about, but its whole manifestation is a process, right? The Kav coming down and moving into into Ak, and then Ak moving into Atzilus, into different Partzifim. It's an unfolding, it's a process. And then Kaviyuchel gets all the way down to Elam Hazeh, to this world. Then we have the whole history, right, of this world from beginning to end, right? which is not separate, right? Even when we talk about processes and we talk about verbs, that's also we have to be careful, because we view those also, unfortunately, because we're down here in the physical world. We view those, we separate them into little pieces, right? Like, okay, so now I'm sitting in front of my computer. That's what I'm doing now. And then once we finish this year, we're gonna get up and I'm gonna put my kids to sleep. So that's a separate thing, right? But it's not. Everything's one continuation. Everything's one process, one unfolding that is just happening from beginning to no end, right? Because the end is to get back to Ein Sof, which is infinity. So, but it's all one organic process. We just, unfortunately, because we're down here and the way we're limited, so we only just see it one little tiny piece at one little second at a time. But that's an illusion that Leshem explains, right? Like the mushal that I say many times. I think Efrayim Goldstein says it, right? Is the idea of, it's like almost like someone looking through. There's a fence. And he's looking for a little crack in the fence. He only sees one little tiny little piece of what's happening. So let's say he's never seen an animal before. He's never seen a dog or a squirrel. So he's looking through this little tiny thing, and then he sees that there's something called the head of that animal or whatever. And then he walks by, then there's something called tail. So he thinks cause and effect, right? Head causes tail, because he's so limited in his point. So, in this point of view. So the whole cause and effect, the whole way we look at the world, and we look at this is something that causes this, and that's something that causes that. It's all because of that limited perspective that we have, that we're not able to see the whole organic reality of existence at once, right? So kaviyuchol, the maschel, the maschel, the person that's trying to understand something, and the mischel, the thing that's trying to be understood, that's not the ikr, because those are just things that are here in this world in an illusory state. The real elikis is coming from the idea of the cycle, which is the process of understanding. He says that's the shorish elikis. He says. So he says, because she machnes a cycle shaloi b'chol dover she oise, that when a person is able to bring that idea of the process of existing and the process of understanding into everything that he's doing, right? In other words, he's bringing the true reality into the illusory reality that we have here of separation, right? So then what happens is, as I machnes shorish elikis b'oise dover, then essentially what he's doing is he's uplifting that physical world. And that's really, the way he puts it is machnes a cycle shaloi b'kol dover shehi oise, right? Is really touching, it really means mindfulness. Put that cycle, put that process of awareness, of understanding, of experiencing into everything that's being done. That way, what happens is it's all connected now, right? Instead of everything being separate, when a person is able to be in the moment and to see that moment is a moment that never stops, a moment that's always moving, that's always changing, it's always transforming, and he's able to put that into everything that he does, that is lifting up the world from the illusory world of nouns into the higher level, the elikis, which is the idea of it all being one organic whole, right? He's able to bring that elikis into everything. And of course, that's going to, it's not just going to mean being in the moment in the way that the Goyim talk about it, just like focusing one moment at a time and not worrying about the future or ruminating about the past. That's also true, but it's more than that, because it's not just not worrying about future and past, but it's about recognizing that what's happening is a continual process and a continual, and that elikis is happening, is unfolding throughout everything that happens, right? History is kaviyuchol, the unfolding of elikis, right? Which is a very, very interesting way of looking at it, right? So he says, and that's what it really means to bring everything up to its source. This is deep stuff, right? So, okay, we're talking about it now. Later, we can all sort of sit down maybe over Shabbos and just sort of just think about it, process it, contemplate it, right? Because we're talking very deep things here. But he says, "Kamosha isa begemura eitzel nuchem ish gamzi." The Gemara talks about nuchem ish gamzi, right? Nuchem ish gamzi. He was called that. He wasn't actually ish gamzi. He was really ish gamza or something. He came from a certain city. They called him nuchem ish gamzi. Why? Because because that was his mid. They said gamzi l'toiva on everything, meaning he recognized the Elikis and the unfolding of Elikis that's happening in everything that happens, right? That was his middah. In everything that he did, and even things that he's not doing consciously himself, but things that are happening to him. He wasn't looking at it as things. Things that nouns. He's looking at that cycle, at that process of understanding, that process of experiencing. That's within every single thing. That's the idea of chesed, like we said, because chesed, like we said, is that idea of that awareness that everything is kaviyuchel, is coming from Hashem, and everything is that unfolding of Elikis. It says ki chachma is shorish chesed ki idea, because chachma is a shorish of chesed, which means that when a person is able to be, we know that there's chachma thinking and bina thinking. Chachma thinking is unity. Bina thinking is putting things into categories, separating them. Olam hazadika thinking, cause and effect type thinking, and categories type thinking. That's bina. But chachma is that higher level, that higher awareness of the continuity and the oneness of everything, and that's the shorish of chesed. Just like in Atzilus, we say the chachma is a shorish, the shorish is a chesed, because chachma is above in Atzilus, and then below that is chesed. So in a void, it's going to be the same thing. That when a person's in tune with that level of chachma, with that level of seeing that Elikis in everything, with his mind, right, and realizing that his mind is also a process, right, that's unfolding. So that's a shorish of chesed, because that then is going to lead him into that awareness that everything is chasudim from Hashem. So it says al kain. So because of this, avunim toivus sheholich lebay kaiser v'nichai ofer b'mekoymai omagamzi l'toiva. The Gemara tells us the story that he was bringing precious stones as a present for the kaiser, for one of the Caesars. Not sure which one. I don't remember exactly where Nuchem Ish Gamzi was in the whole history of things, right? But he was bringing these precious stones to the Caesar of Rome, and he stopped off at an inn, and basically people stole the stones and they filled up the treasure chest with dirt, right? That's what happened. And when he saw that happened, he said Gamzi l'toiva, right? Because those ganovim, even though of course they for themselves are for sure accountable, and they're going to need to get whatever's coming to them for what they did, because in this world of separation there is that achrayus of a person taking charge of himself and having that bechira to choose toif. So of course there is that element to it. But in the higher perspective, in the higher way of looking at things, this is part of the unfolding of Elikis. This is part of, if they took it, it's gone, right? The diamonds aren't there anymore. It's dirt now. So this is what it is, right? This is how it unfolded. This is how the Ein Sof wanted this experience to unfold, right? So he said, Gamzi l'toiva. And that means, because there's no reason to look down on dirt, because dirt isn't anything less than diamonds, because it's also an expression of Elikis, and it's also really from the same of the Dal Yisodis, because the four elements, because that element of earth is the same element that produces diamonds, the same element that produces dirt, right? this is a very, very high level, because for us living here in the physical world, it's almost like counterintuitive, because we think like, yeah, well, what do you mean? Now you're going to go and bring this box of dirt to the king because it's all the same thing. Well, the king isn't on your level, right? The king isn't on that level of dvaikus, and for him it's going to be very different, right? But ultimately, if a person really gets to that type of a level of understanding and of awareness, and even if it would, because it ends up that he was saved by a miracle, right? But even if it wouldn't have been, in other words, if the king would have gotten furious and would have executed him, it wouldn't have affected him at all in his perspective, because yeah, if that's what's meant to happen, that the king is meant to execute me, right? So that's also part of the unfolding of Elikis. It's a very, very high level, and I know it's something that will be very, very hard for us to actually implement to the extent that Nechemish Ganzi implemented it, right? But at least to a certain extent, with the simple things that happen to us that that are beyond our control. It doesn't mean we're not allowed to do hishtadlus to make things better, because again, we have to oscillate, we have to live in these two realms at once. We have to live in the physical world, and we do our hishtadlus in the physical world. And hishtadlus is not an avira, it's not a problem to do hishtadlus, right? But we have to know that it's like the way we always talk about it, that I'm just playing my role in this game of the physical world of separation. But at the same time I'm playing my role here, I'm aware that it's just a role, and I'm aware that the separation is just a play on a stage, and it's not mamish really the way that the things really are. I'm just playing along, so to speak, right? And Nechemish Ganzi was able to do that to the highest level, to the extent that he didn't even feel that he had to do anything to protect his life, right? We're not required to do that because we're not Nechemish Ganzi and we're not on that level. Right, we can do hishtadlus. The same time we do the hishtadlus, we remind ourselves the hishtadlus is just playing along, and whatever Hashem wants to happen is what's going to happen. Because if you really think about it, let's say a person wants to have reichas yomim, right? So his hishtadlus is going to be to eat healthy and to exercise, right? Let's say, but he's not in control of chas v'shulam, the fact that he might get hit by a bus. Right, that's out of his control already, right? What Hashem wants will happen is what's going to happen anyways, right? We're allowed to do hishtadlus mostly just for our own comfort, but also just because it's part of playing along in the game. But ultimately, we have to be aware that whatever Hashem wants to happen is what's going to happen in the long run, right? Not even in the long run, every second, right? Anyways. So he says this, or Nechemish Ganzi says that he realized that dirt, there's nothing wrong with dirt. Dirt is also part of the Yesod HaOfer, just like the Avonim Toivus are. And it's all just part of the manifestation of Hashem. So Gamzi L'Toiva, this is also good. Because Avshehi Yesod HaTachton, even though dirt and the precious stones for that matter are from Yesod HaOfer, from the element of earth, which is the lowest of all of them, but it doesn't matter that it's the lowest. Because what's lower, what's higher? Everything is an expression of Elikis. And because of that, because his cycle, his process of experiencing the world was so connected to the cycle alien, to the unfolding of the process as a whole, because of course every single person is just one little tiny facet, one little tiny cell of the expression of the whole. But his particular expression, his particular experience, he realized is just one aspect of the experience of Elikis, which is the experience that's unfolding all the time. And so he was so connected to that, so it didn't make any difference to him if he's dealing with Yesod HaOfer, which is the high Efrayim of Shem Havaya, if he's dealing with Yesod HaAisha, Yesod HaMayim, which are higher up. It didn't make a difference because it's all Likis. And that's the idea, Bemis, of being aware of that chesed that's manifesting all the time. That chesed, meaning that idea that everything that's happening is unfolding in a good way, because it's not a random process, right? The universe is not unconscious and and without intellect. It's a process that is an unfolding of the intellect, kaviyuchel, of the Ein Sof and of the Atzmas itself, right? So it's obviously chesed. And that's the idea of realizing that shorish elikish, that's in everything. Shorish of elikish, that's within everything. And be'emes, a person who's on that level knows that nature is not a boundary either. Because, and again, all right, we have to balance this, because a person could say, oh, I have such betuchen in Hashem, nature doesn't mean anything, so I can jump off a high building and I'll be saved. We don't do that. We don't do. But someone was on that level, right? Such dvaikus. Nature doesn't mean anything either, right? Because that nature itself is also just an expression of Elikis. So he says, because the idea is that if a person is aware that everything's just unfolding by like kiss, so he knows that nature itself is just illusory in a certain sense too, because it's all kivyuchel, just elikis manifesting, and just like the elikis can manifest in nature, elikis can manifest in ways that are outside of nature, all the nisim, all the miracles, the Klal Yisrael experience, and all these different things. And then when a person's on that level and realizes that, then there's no din anymore, right? There's no suffering anymore, because he realizes that everything is just that expression of a likis. And that's what Eliyahu Novi alluded to Nuchamish Gamzi in the story, right? Because Pusha, the way the story went was that he brought this box of dirt to the king. And then the king was furious that there's this box of dirt being brought to him. And what are the Jews trying to do? They're giving a box of dirt. They're trying to make fun of me. And Eliyahu Novi appeared there as one of the servants in the guise of one of the servants of the king. And he said, maybe this is special dirt. Maybe this is the dirt of Avram, which Push-up Shad just refers to the idea that Avram Avinu in his Milchama, with the kings, he had this special dirt that when he would throw it into the air, it would turn to arrows, and those arrows would shoot into the enemy, right? But why is it dafka that we're picking this idea that's the dirt of Avram? So he explains, the idea of realizing the dirt of Avram is realizing that there's that chesed Hashem even in that dirt. And so then nature no longer, the boundaries of nature no longer need to exist, right? A person that has betuchen Hashem, who's a doctor, right? A doctor comes and tells a person, you have 3 months to live. But if a person really is on that highest level of a minna, and if Dvaik is to Hashem, he knows that Hashem, to Hashem it doesn't make a difference whether this illness is fatal or it's not fatal. We've seen plenty of cases, people that were diagnosed with illnesses and were given a few months to live, and they totally got out of it. Yes, it's true. Sometimes not, because sometimes things do run their course, right? The way that nature expresses itself, because usually nature does stay nature, because there's this idea of that elikis has to be concealed, because if the elikis would be open and visible, then that would sort of take away the whole illusion of separation, which, like we said, Hashem wants that illusion of separation to a certain extent, because Hashem Kaviyuchel wants that other to relate to. And if we become duvik to everything and one with elikis, then there's no other. It's just, the person and the lekis, it's all one. So in a certain sense, that mask of nature has to sort of maintain itself, but it doesn't always have to, right? Because ultimately everything is a lekis, so Hashem's in control, and so that's why nisim happen, miracles happen, open ones or concealed ones, but it happens all the time. So he says, what's it called? So he says, so that's the idea. And that's what the middle of Avram, the middle of Chesed, seeing that Chesed Hashem and everything. And that's why, but in the story of Menucha Mishgamzi, you had that was the dirt of Avram. So now to tie it into the Parsha, right, is almost by the end. This is usually our cutoff time. We started a few minutes late. We're almost by the end. So he says, so that's really what you see in the psikim here in the Parsha. That, like he said before, at the end of the parsha, when Avram encountered the Maluchim, he said that was the idea of Yaakov encountering the Maluchim. That was the idea of Yaakov being coiled with himself, that mid of Chesed, which is that awareness of the Elokis that's in everything, and of course also the mid of Gvira, which is the idea of yes, everything's Elokis, but there's a structure and there's a way I have to conduct myself, balancing those two, right? So then it says, Oz Vayishlach Yaakov Maluchim Mamish. So then it says Yaakov sent to Yosef, which is Olam HaAsiyah. Yaakov brought down into Olam Hazeh Maluchim Mamish, where Mamish, as it says Rosh Taivas, Maschel, Mischel, Seichel. That's the idea of that process of understanding. The Maschel, the understander, Mischel, the understood, and Seichel, the process, which is the Iker, and that's Mamish, Maluchim Mamish. He says, he brought that higher awareness to Isav, his brother. That's the idea of sending the Maluchim to Isav. Isav is Olam HaAsiyah. Isav is the physical world. He brought that higher understanding down to the physical world. That was the idea of meeting with Isav, was to bring down that Elikis into Olam HaAsiyah. Olam HaAsiyah, where we are, and which we're attached to, like to a brother, because we're, however spiritual we are, we're ultimately very, very attached. We're in this body. We can't escape the body, and we're not meant to escape the body, right? So what's it called? So it's like a brother to us. That's what it means. The brother Isav. It's our buddy Olam HaGashmi. Where for better or for worse, we're stuck with him. Just like a person can't choose his brothers, he can choose his friends, but he can't choose his brothers. His brother's his brother, right? So we're sort of stuck with that, and we're connected to that. But that's good because we're able to bring that elikis into it, right? Arza Sayer, to the land of Sayer, as the Pusuk continues. And that's the idea of that we have to annul the klippus, annul the illusion of separation in Olam HaAsiyah, because Sayer, which means a goat, right? There's psikim where it says that the shaidim are called seirim, called like goats, right? And the Sayer Azuzel, sending the goat to Azuzel, right? That they did on Yom Kippur, was also that same bechina. So Arza Sayer means, that we go into the physical world, which is the place of that klippa, and we're mevatel the klippas. We annul that illusion of separation. Sedai Edom, the land of Edom. He says, Haine dinim, kedisa b'zohar kudush. Edom means red, and red is din, like the Zohar Kudush says. So when we're able to come to that level of annulling the klippas, annulling the separation, realizing the interconnectedness of all things, realizing that everything that happens is a process, and that process is one integral process, that every single tiny aspect of it is part of a beautiful, tremendous picture that we can't see because we're only looking one little tiny second at a time. Then we're mevatel those dinim. That's sedai edom, being mevatel those dinim. But tzorich lehamtikon. And so then it says, v'yitzav oisam, that the Yaakov commanded the Maluchim. What does that mean? V'yitzav, commanding, like the Zohar Kodesh says, comes from the illusion of tzavsa, which is connecting, right? However that works etymologically, I don't know. Probably maybe because a command from a king to a servant implies a connection. I don't know, but the idea of tzivi, of commanding, is an expression of tzavsa, is an expression of connecting, right? That the Yaakov is connecting the Maluchim, connecting that higher awareness, that chesed, right? That idea of seeing the oneness of Elikis in everything. He's binding that to Olam HaAsiyah, binding that to Isav, to the physical world. and says Koi Tomer La Doini La Isav, and then he says, and this is what you should say to Isav, my master. Why is he calling him Doini? And the Shorish Adna, Shoy Boilam Asiyah, because that Boilam Asiyah, that Isav, is Adna, it's Malchus, because in the structure of the Oilamus, right, Asiyah is the Malchus. Finally, Kasha Shorish Alekis, Shesh Boilam Asiyah, Chol Dover Dover. So that's the idea, to bind that Shorish of Alekis, to recognize that bond between the Shorish Alekis in the higher worlds with Oilam Asiyah, with the physical world. Chol Dover Dover, and every single thing and every single event and experience that we have down here. And then he says, Im Luvan Garti, I lived with Luvan. He says that the idea of dwelling with Luvan, where that was the first thing that Yaakov told Esav, that you dwelled with Luvan. Luvan is whiteness. That's the idea of Tshiva. Because Tshiva whitens our virus, right? How does Tshiva come into this whole picture? Because the person, in order to be on this higher level of awareness, like we said, he has to have, in addition to that chesed, that awareness of Elikis and everything, he has to have the Gvira too, which is the structure, right? And someone asked the question about the 400 men that came with Isaac. This is coming up in 1 second, and we're almost done. It's mamish the next thing. So we'll get there in a second. But the idea is that the person needs to have that structure, and part of that structure means that a person is going to make mistakes because we're so attached to the physical world. So there's the idea that when we do tshiva is like we saw in Reb Nachman, is machzer dover l'shorshay. Tshiva means to bring something back to its place. Is that when a person sometimes does fall into Olam Asiyah and get detached from that dvaikas, needs to be able to return. So that's im Luvan Garti. In order for Yaakov to be mashpia to Esav, in order for Yaakov to bring that kedusha into the physical world, he has to be able to also not sink into the physical world, and if he does, to rise out, to rise up above it. And that's the idea of im Luvan Garti, he says. That the neshama comes from a higher place and has to be mashpia into this world. And that's the idea of that he said, I have oxes and donkeys, because that represents the idea of klippus. He says, the Kinizor says, because the idea is that the person is attached to the klippus. That's sort of part of that avoida, is to be able to bring the kedusha even into those darkest places. But of course, that means to annul the klippus. Hashem is burach. Hashem helped me, Yaakov is saying, to annul them, right? V'karafti l'kedusha, the other Abraham malamdim sanagoria olai. The idea is to sort of transform those klippus from forces of separation into forces of connection, in which case they're for me instead of against me, which is again that idea of elevating the physical world. And this is all in order to sort of connect to that Adoini, which is Adna, which is Olam Asiyah. And he goes on, like we're way over time, so I'm just I'm skipping a little bit, but he goes on with a few of these other psikim to sort of that all these things bring this idea of limtzechain by nechel, to find favor in your eyes, means to be able to find that chain in the Olam Agashmi, to see that Elikis, that's in everything. And then finally finishes off with this is what someone asked about, what's with these 400 men that came with Isa, right? So he says, what does that mean that now? So Yaakov now is connecting to Olam Asiyah. He's bringing the Kedusha to Olam Asiyah. He's revealing that Kedusha and that Dvaikus and that process of cycle, which is in Olam Asiyah, and suddenly Isaac comes with 400 men, right? There's a Heine Bezei Amshuchas V'Achnusas Aleph She'alifa Shel Olam B'Chol Dover. Because the idea is that Yaakov sort of brings that idea of of the Alif Shel Olam, the master of the world, that idea of that Dvaikus to Hashem into everything, was a Memaila ha tuf shel emes she arba mayos holich likroschu l'kasher him mem v'yaseh oisis emes. So basically, the way he explains it is, again, it's all allegorical, right? The story of Yaakov happened with real people, all right? Or some people say that the 400 men of Yosef were Maluchim. Some say that the 400 men of Yosef were neshamas that needed a tikkun. So then what's it called? The Dovid Melech had 400 soldiers, special soldiers with the mohawks, like the Gemara tells us. Whatever. That's not in the guy, but at least I'll be the mushal that we're saying here is the word emes goes from aleph to mem, which is 40, to tuf, which is 400, right? So basically the idea is that you bring that aleph, you bring that alif shel olam, you bring that kavyuchal, that elikis, into olam asiyah, which is the fourth of the worlds, which is mem, because mem is 40, right? Each olam has 10 spheres. So Atzilus has 10 spheres, and Bria has 10 spheres, Yitzir has 10 spheres, and Asiyah has 10 spheres. So that mem, that 40, represents the idea of Olam Asiyah. And then it becomes a tuf, which is 400. Because basically what's happening is you are, by bringing that elikis into the world, or that awareness of elikis into the world, you're suddenly realizing that it's so much more than what it appears to be. Everything, kol ma sheyesh v'kol yesh b'prat. So then everything that's in Olam Agashmi, in this mem, in this Olam Asiyah, is really so much more than it appears to be. It goes from tens to hundreds. And you could also say, perhaps it's part of his intention, that the aleph could also mean aleph, could mean 1,000, right? So that's like expanding it even more. You begin to see the infinite chasudim of Hashem that exist, even in a world that appears to be finite, and a world of din. And with that, all the dinim become sweetened, and that is essentially the end of suffering. So it's very much easier said than done, but that's really the end of suffering. Is to bring in that kedusha and that awareness of the kedusha, and the awareness that everything is good and that everything's a process, and you can't judge a certain event because the event doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's rather part of an organic whole, so to speak. And then the person comes to that level of being mamtik the dinim and seeing the kedusha in everything. He says, it's someone who's wise will understand this. So I don't know how wise we are, but hopefully we understood at least a little bit of it, right? Okay. So that's the piece. I hope Doilam enjoyed it. I did, even though I'll be honest, I also didn't understand everything, but it's deep and it's something to think about, to be Makadish this world, and to look at the holiness in this world, and look at everything in a positive way, and look at everything as part of that gili of Hashem. So by Hashem, we should be zeichet to get there, as Hashem. All right. A wonderful Shabbos, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Bez Hashem, we'll continue the shiurim next week on regular schedule. Bez Hashem. Kol tov.
Kol tov.